Firstly, I would really like to thank all of you who've come, the audience. You've been amazingly engaged, interested, and I do appreciate that. Of course, I also would like to thank Beaux Arts Magazine for organizing this day. It's a first for France, and I think that's incredibly important for the French art market. I would also like to thank the Centre Pompidou for hosting us and hosting such an interesting day. So I'm going to give you a few takeaways from today. It's been the opportunity to explore many subjects. Some of them were really quite technical, like blockchain, and I know that now you all understand blockchain, or forensic science, which was extremely interesting as well. And then we've gone across to subjects which are perhaps easier in a way because we know them better: Instagram, the online market, or the position of France in the global art market. We also talked about Banksy, which, of course, unless you were on the moon for the last 6 months, you certainly all knew about the shredded Banksy at Sotheby's. So here are the elements, my takeaways. I think probably the most important aspect, the key word that came back over and over again in the talks was the question of trust. This seems to be fundamental to the art market and to many of the different panels which went into different subjects, but always the word trust came back. For example, in Roxana's panel, there was a question of trust in the French specialists when we were looking at how French gallerists and auction houses can extend beyond the French frontiers. Magda Danzig also talked about the importance of trust when she works with her clients. Ultimately, trust is terribly important for the art market because the more trust there is, the more people will be willing to engage with the market, and that is a really important aspect of the future. The second thing I think is very important is communication. It was interesting, we had a presentation from the Barnabys about how this little mobile phone now is something that people use in order to buy art, to discover art, to learn about art. And this has really changed our world. The use of Instagram as well, only on your mobile phone. I think that for the question of communications, it's important to identify objectives. And to have a strategy. That came out clearly out of the section that we had on Instagram. Communication also was very interesting in the very last panel. A breakdown of communication between African countries and France led to the problems that we have been seeing at the moment with this restitution question. Another thing that was important, I think, was the importance of reaching new audiences. And this we have companies now, particularly these startups, these online companies, that will reach new audiences, for example, Asper or Katawiki and the other ones who presented, as well as Instagram. But they also pose the problem of authentication, since it's online. There are fewer guarantees. Again, we come back to trust. It was very interesting what, again, Magda Danzig said about seeing works online that perhaps didn't reflect exactly the quality of the work that she had in her gallery. This, of course, leads us on to the importance of blockchain. I moderated the panel about blockchain, and it was extremely interesting to see what the possibilities are for blockchain for gaining more trust by making provenance and authentication locked into a database. There is another thing that is interesting, is the question of what will happen to a lot of intermediaries. There are a couple of people who presented today. Artea was one of them, and TagSmart, in which they have projects to have collectors and buyers meet directly without intermediaries. It'll be interesting to see how this evolves. I haven't got a solution, but I think it's worth reflecting about what will happen to the art market in the future. Then we had the technical challenges. For the gallerist, these new technologies, not that new in the case of Instagram, but that is also going to demand a lot of their resources. Perrotin has people who are dedicated to doing Instagram. That's not possible for every gallerist. But I think, to conclude, because you've had a long day and I don't want to keep you too long, there's a lot to say, but I think what was encouraging about today was that what came out was nevertheless that the human factor remains very important. Nathalie Obadia explained how, nevertheless, the contact with gallerists, going with art fairs, going to her gallery in Brussels, that it is the human contact, the human factor that remains very important. And I thought that the last panel on restitution, which was so interesting, was wonderful because it talked also about this, the human factor. And I thought that when Didier Claes asked the question, do we love art? I think that we can all reply, yes, we do. Thank you.